Are you a bass beginner and do you feel like you're struggling with your bass progress? Well, use these 5 tips and you might get yourself a lot further than you think you would have. And number 5 is to do with this hand. It's often the one that's forgotten about, and you might be struggling with bad bass tone essentially, and you might be picking and plucking the strings and doing all sorts of things that don't make a nice bass sound. But I want you to think, don't pluck the string, press the string. If you press the string with your finger, it will get a much nicer sound, and you'll find you won't be hurting your fingers as much. Now, you're still going to build up a chalice, and you will get times where you get blisters on your fingers. That is just a natural thing, but it does show a sign of progression, and you've really put some effort into it to get a blister, so well done essentially. But if you think press the string, not pluck the string, you can go a lot further with your bass tone. It's like a little man that walks along the strings, and just press the string, don't pluck or pull the string. Make sure you're pressing it down like this, and press your fingers into your thumb, not too hard, they're only touching lightly like this. Probably use less force than you think you need, and just like cover your hand up with this and just try and just get some strokes like that. You should sort of hear perhaps a clicking noise like you would if you click your fingers together when your fingers hit your thumb. You won't hear it every time, and it's not as loud as a click with that, but that does show you're getting that right contact there. And if you're pressing the strings, you're going to go a lot further than if you're plucking them. Next up is also again something else to do with this hand, and it's keeping your thumb on strings above where you're playing. So essentially the lower strings, if you're playing higher up, keeping your thumb on those strings to mute them. And while yes, you can mute with your hand, and you often mute with your hand if you're playing lower, you mute the higher strings with your hand, but we'll get onto that in a second. And I will talk about it in this step as well, because this is just muting in general, and it is a thing that a lot of beginners suffer with, where they're playing strings and then other strings ring out that they don't want to ring out. Essentially, with this hand, your thumb is going to be the muting aid when you're on the higher strings, and when you're on the lower strings, your fingers are obviously there, and they're the strings that you want to play anyway, and this hand is going to be resting on those strings higher up. But let's talk about this thumb first. Essentially, if I'm playing on the E string, my thumb is on the pickup. Please ground your thumb. That is another beginner issue. If you're not grounding your thumb on a pickup or a string, and you're just leaving it hanging somewhere, don't do that. Put it on a pickup, sort of rest it up like this, as you can see my thumb here, and then on the E string, I'll have it on the pickup. If I'm playing the A string, my thumb moves down onto the E string. And if I'm playing the A string, or if I'm playing the D or G strings, I don't often go up to the D string to play the G string, but if I'm playing the D or G strings, my thumb will be on the A string. And I've got these 3 positions: on the pickup for when I'm playing E, on the E string for when I'm playing A or D sometimes, but often if I'm playing D or G, my thumb will be on the A string. There's not really a need to go any higher, because you can reach over with your fingers, but move your thumb while you're doing this. And if you learn it, it should come naturally. But I will say, when I'm on the A string, my thumb is still resting on the E string here. It's resting on the side like this. So the E string is muted as well, although I don't have my thumb on it. When your thumb's obviously on it, it mutes it anyway, it can't ring out. But if your thumb isn't on it, rest the side of it on. You should still feel it's a natural and comfortable feeling. Then with this hand, essentially, you sort of just have to like put the little fleshy part of your finger over the strings, like sort of keep your fingers quite flat. Like I do obviously arch them slightly, but by the time you get to the end of the arch, and you can even just use one finger for this, you can use your pinky, that's the main one that's great for muting, because obviously it's the closest this way, and it'll be the one that's doing most of the work when it comes to muting. But just to have a little bit of your skin on those lower strings there when you're playing some of these, on the higher strings, sorry, when you're playing the lower strings, does go a long way for eliminating a lot of the, ringing out of those strings. Although it tends to be the lower strings which are the issue, which is why I covered that thumb first. Next up is just bad hand position on the fretboards. So my tip for you, take your hand out, wiggle your fingers around, sort of make an arch shape with your fingers, but make your thumb pretty flat, and put it on the bass. You should be able to get a 3-fret span pretty easily without having to feel a stretch going first finger, third finger and pinky. You can do it with your third as well, that's fine, but you know, use your pinky. But you know, if you can do that hand position, then you've got reasonably good hand position, and if your wrist is feeling comfortable and not aching, and it's not like an obscene angle like this and your hands aren't doing all sorts of weird things, if you can rest your hand on the bass like this and not have all sorts of weird tensions, then you're doing great for your hand positions. Now, next up, I've already alluded to it, and it is use your pinky. The sooner you can use your pinky, the much more dexterous you will be with the bass. And also, if you're struggling with reach issues, if you start using your pinky, you will struggle with those reach issues a lot less than previously. So please do use your pinky, because then you can span way more of the fretboard when need be. I can even do 5 frets here from 1st fret to 5th fret. I do have to change my hand position slightly. 4 isn't really a stretch, but 5 definitely is, and 6 obviously just isn't going to happen. But you know, I've got weird monster hands when it comes to that. But if I wasn't using my pinky, 4 is a stretch really, and 3 is about where I'd want it. So you can get an extra fret of range really by using your pinky. So please do use your pinky, and you know, if you're not, please start using it. It will feel weird at first, I know, because it's not a very strong finger initially, but once you get used to it, it will be much strong enough and you'll have no problems with it, and you'll use it like second nature. And this last one isn't really a technique thing, it's just a choice on what you're playing, and it's don't learn all of those scales and exercises instead of learning tunes. Now, as a beginner bass player, you'll probably be given all these scales and exercises and fingering charts to learn. And while learning your fingering charts and learning your fretboard is great, and as a beginner, you should be learning your fingerboard. It's a great thing which you should do, and it's sort of an omission from this list, but I will link my video on how to learn the fretboard if you do want to do that. Please do it as a beginner as well. Works as a great honorable mention here. But getting back to the matter at hand, if you do not learn tunes, you won't really be able to play with other people, because no one wants you to play loads of scales, and you'll enjoy the process of playing a lot more if you play tunes that you like rather than all these scales. Learning all the scales and stuff is very useful, and it's great in the theory side of things, but when you're a beginner, it is great to have a tune done quickly, and it makes you feel good about your bass playing, and then it makes you feel good about what you're playing and makes you want to continue. And often, if you start learning tunes, then you're going to have a much more enjoyable time playing the bass than if you just start learning all of these scales. Incorporate some of that into your playing, but if you're not learning tunes, then you're really doing yourself a disservice. So please do start doing that.
So the age-old question of what makes a great bass player? Well, in today's video, we're going to get into exactly what a great bass player needs and what you're going to need to do to get there if you aren't there already. Now, there are plenty of things that make up what being a truly great bass player is, but for the purposes of today's video, I'm just going to shorten it down to 5 very important things which, if you master, then you're bound to be a great bass player anyway. But there are nuances in all kinds of different styles, could be explained in hundreds and hundreds of other videos. So the first one does just come from technical proficiency. If you can't play, then you can't play, and you can't really get anywhere. You need the sort of technical efficiency under your fingers to be able to play the music that you want to play. If you can play the music that is needed to get played at gigs or concerts or whatever, then you've done this step already, and you know how to play those tunes. Or if you can learn them and then play them pretty quickly, like, you know, in a matter of hours at most, I'd say, unless it's a really complicated thing. But if you can't really play and you're only really a beginner and you're only just starting, then you know, this is just something which you're going to have to build up over time. And don't feel discouraged by this, because it's that process, it's that journey what makes the bass just such an enjoyable instrument to play on, from going from those first sort of just learning what your open strings are and those first sort of simple bass lines to perhaps something a bit more complicated. So there's all sorts of things that you can go through, and you know, you go through the stages and you go through the process, you go through the journey, but when you get to that better stage, then you do have the technical proficiency under your fingers, and that is something which really just is necessary, especially in a style like jazz. You're really going to need to keep things up. And on the subject of keeping things up, endurance is the next one. Ultimately, at a gig or whatever, you're going to be playing for at least an hour, unless maybe you're supporting another band, then you might be playing for 45 minutes, but at least half an hour, but in most cases an hour, then a break, and then probably another hour. It could even be an hour and a half, break, an hour and a half. So there's a lot of endurance which you're going to need to build up, because as a beginner, 5 minutes may feel like so much, and after a tune that's 5 minutes long, you feel like, oh my god, how can people play for so long? But it all comes with time, and it all comes with practice, and you build that up as a skill, of course, and you build up all of that physical endurance. And again, it's sort of like the first one, it just comes from playing more. You just need to play more. The more you sort of just get around the bass and just sort of fiddle around with it and sort of get used to it and improve your technique, then the more endurance that you're going to get. Because most of the time, if it's a jazz gig, this is what I'm going to be doing for quite a lot of the gig, because I'm just going to be walking, not necessarily at this tempo, but this is a nice sort of tempo for this talking speed. And actually, it is quite a good thing if you're doing something, or maybe you're watching a video, perhaps not if you're doing something really, because if you're doing something, you're going to be doing something. But if you're sort of doing nothing and you're watching a video, if you just get your bass out and do what I'm doing right now as I'm talking, and just doesn't matter what notes you're playing really, but if you just sort of keep this groove and rhythm going, you can pick a tempo, you can go faster, you can go slower, but you can sort of concentrate on what you're working on at this speed as you go through all of it, and you sort of can build up your endurance this way as well. We're just doing this, and if you're watching a video at the same time, you don't have to be too worried about notes, but the thing that you do want to be worried and thinking about is just the consistency, because I don't want to just and then stop and then keep going like that. I want to just keep it going through all of this, and I find this is a good way to build endurance as well, just if you're not practicing. But obviously through your practice you're going to be building your endurance anyway, so it doesn't make too much difference. But if you do this on top of it, then you can build up your endurance even faster. We all know the secret to playing fast is playing slow after all. So the next one is sort of just play of the style of music that you want to play, but also be able to play other styles of music, because you are going to have a preference, and mine's of course jazz, and in that example I'm going to be doing lots of walking bass lines as I've been demonstrating earlier. But in pop you might want just some more single note lines perhaps, and you know, in funk you've got all kinds of things like the chicken. I know that's sort of more of a jazzy funk thing, but then you can do all sorts of like disco octavey things as well. So there's loads of different styles that you can get into, and perhaps this isn't the best bass for disco considering it's a fretless, but I think it sounds quite nice. But maybe a fretted P or a fretted J would be better for that sort of job. But it's all about sort of honing your craft in the style that you want, but also having the ability to play other styles, as ultimately being versatile as a musician is what makes a great musician. And in this case with bass playing, being able to play all sorts of different styles, and you'll find some of them are pretty similar and some of them are sort of just simplified versions of other styles. Like, to some extent, I know this is a massive generalization, and I'm not saying pop is inferior to jazz in any way, but as a general, pop is sort of jazz simplified and sort of just turned down a bit in terms of the chord progressions and chord harmony, but doesn't mean it's a worse style, and it's still skills that you should learn, and the skill set is still different for pop than it is for jazz. A great jazz player isn't going to be as great as pop as a great pop player, so it all comes down also just to the specific tune as well. So if you develop your skill set not only at the style that you like and the music that you like the most, but also develop it through in other styles that you may also like or may not like, but you're just going to have to play for things. The next one is simply just be prepared for things. And if you get a gig opportunity, or you've got to play somewhere, you've got to play with someone, or you know, you're doing anything like that, just being prepared for it is what makes a great musician ultimately. If you've got the technical proficiency behind you, but you don't prepare for the gig and you don't know any of the tunes, then you're not really going to do so well. And although yes, you can use your ears and get all of that dialed in as well, that shouldn't be your only reliance. You should actually know the tunes, as if you know the tunes that you're going to play, roughly speaking, most of the tunes you're going to play, you never know exactly what's going to happen on the gig. But if you've been sent a set list, just go through everything on that set list. Don't be like, ah, no, it's fine. If you already know some of the tunes, then by all means skip them. But, you know, maybe play them through once. If you're perhaps like, oh, I know that tune, but I'm not as familiar with it. Or even if you know the tune, just play it through once and just check that it's all as you remember it. And then you can also check if they're going to do it in a different key, because it's always useful to know what keys you're doing things in. If you're just prepared, then you can show up calm and you know what you're going to do. And it's going to be ultimately a much more enjoyable gig to play, as you're not sort of panicking all over the place and sort of not knowing what to play. And the other musicians there will notice that as well, and they'll be like, hey, he's a good player, he prepares for his gigs, and we'll call him back. And ultimately that's what makes a great musician in the gigging space, is being prepared for everything. And in at number one has absolutely nothing to do with your instrument whatsoever, so even a complete beginner can master this. But ultimately it still takes time as well, just to sort of get into the rhythm of it to some extent. But it's just be nice, be kind, be humble, give other musicians compliments, because if you do that, you're complimenting other musicians and you're generally just a nice person to be around. You've got good energy, good atmosphere, and you're supportive of everyone in the groups that you're playing with, and you feel like you're enjoying the music that you're playing, even if perhaps it's not your favorite music. If you still make the most out of it and still try and enjoy it as much as you can, then that goes a long way, and it can be absolutely detrimental. If you've got the skills, no one cares if you're just an absolute knob and no one wants to play with you. So this is a truly really important thing, and it doesn't have to be learned on the instrument. It can just be learned in general life with just basic social skills and being nice to each other. But if you do that, then you are on the way to just becoming an absolutely fantastic musician. As even if you don't play the best, that's not ultimately what people care about the most. Yes, you've got to be able to play, and I've made that obvious in my first point, but if you're nice as well, then often musicians will pick someone who they prefer playing with that perhaps isn't as good as someone that is a better player but just isn't really very nice or not very supportive, or they turn up late or something like that. Being on time is always a very important thing with musicians, and just not making them sort of worry and think, oh no, is this perhaps a bad idea? Especially in first impressions, if you're late to like a first gig doing with someone and you haven't got like a real valid excuse to it. And once word gets out about perhaps if you've not been nice to someone, then people ultimately don't want to play with you, and it sort of just ends up going like that really. But before we end today's video, I want to go through 5 misconceptions on what makes a great musician. The first one is you've got to be able to play fast, and you've got to always be able to play fast. While playing fast is important to some extent, it's really not what makes a great musician. You don't have to play fast to play great. Next up is you've got to have all professional gear. While a professional instrument is great and nice, and this is by all means a professional bass and Music Man Stingray I've got here, it's by no means a cheap bass, but I'm not good because of my playing on this bass. I could pretty much play the same on any other bass, as long as it's not falling to pieces and it still works, then that's all good with me. Number 3, you've got to have all the best effects pedals. Now, for what I do for jazz, like, I don't really use any pedals ever. I've used an octave pedal once on a jazz gig, I think, and you know, I barely used it. I used it for like one funk tune, I think, and it's octave down, obviously, an octave pedal, and sort of what Sledgehammer does on that fretless bass line there. That's a really great tune, actually. Not a jazz one, but generally a great tune. But you don't need all this extra fancy gear, and more specifically, pedals. And number 2 sort of goes hand in hand with you've got to play fast, but it's you've got to always be able to play the hardest stuff possible, and that really just isn't the case. Simple stuff can sound really great, and you know, a lot of especially jazz music isn't going to be the hardest thing you come across, but if it's feel good music, then you know it's great music after all. And another one is you've got to be taught how to be a great musician by someone else. Now, I'm definitely a very self-taught musician, and while I have had teachers along the way, I've really mostly been taught by myself, and it's certainly not a bad thing to be a self-taught musician. While musicianship runs in my family, and a lot of my other family members are musicians, and I've got advice from them and got advice from other people, getting advice and applying that to your own practice is a perfectly valid method of becoming a great musician. You don't need expensive teachers or teachings to get there. Now, if you don't have a musical family or musical sort of background within your family, then by all means get a teacher. But if you really teachers are expensive, and I will say this because they just are, frankly, and you're not going to need a teacher every time you practice. You'll be able to practice stuff without your teacher. But if you get perhaps 2 weeks worth of lessons, and just they can tell you, right, this is how you want to get your hand position right, this is what you want to do with your fingers, and then just away you go. You've got the basic techniques, we've got some of the bad habits out of the way, then you can get straight into it, and you should really have little hiccups which are going to mean you are a worse player than someone that is getting lessons, because ultimately there's so much stuff available online. Like if you're watching this video, then you've clearly got some reason of being here, and you can look at some of my other tutorial videos on how to do things, but you don't need a teacher, especially considering how expensive they are, to become a great musician. But that's it for today's video. I hope that you've learned something from these 5 things which I think are so important to become a great musician, bassist, whatever instrument. It doesn't really matter, to be honest. The same things apply to all of those instruments, and really the 5 things that are misconceptions which I think you should get out of your head instantly, because it's not worth thinking about all those things. What really makes a difference is getting in the practice room every day. Doesn't matter for how long, it could be 5 minutes, and just doing something, and that is the way you're going to become an absolutely fantastic musician.